Do you hear it? The echoes of the past, the whispers of forgotten truths, fragments of memories lost in the shadows. Welcome to BRAINROT, Echoes, where we bring you stories long buried, unravel mysteries cloaked by time, and guide you through the darkest corners of the mind and the universe. Each video is more than just content. It's an echo resonating deep within, urging you to question, to wonder, to explore. Backend index pointing right, hit subscribe, turn on the notification bell, and join us in listening to the echoes the world tried to silence. The Lake Light Event, a prophecy from the lakebed. My recorder softly hummed on the old, worn wooden table between us. You want to know what happened with the Lake Light Event? The old soldier's weathered face crinkled into something between a smile and a grimace. Well, grab a drink, kid. This isn't your standard issue war story. As the only surviving geologist from the 2050 Lake Light expedition, Professor Alastair Finch was notoriously tight-lipped about the discovery that changed human history 25 years ago. The fact that he'd agreed to speak with me, a junior historian with barely enough credentials to access the public archives, was nothing short of miraculous. Most people think it was our superior equipment, or some lucky coincidence, he continued, swirling amber liquid in his glass. Truth is, we were just reckless scientists, and what we found, it wasn't from this planet. The bar around us hummed with the usual evening crowd, but a bubble of respectful distance had formed around our booth. Everyone knew who Finch was, even if most were too young to remember the event itself. Our expedition was sent to Lake Vostok in Antarctica, drilling through almost 4 kilometers of ice to reach a pristine lake isolated for millions of years. He took a slow sip. The theory was we'd find ancient, unknown life forms. Instead, we found something else. I leaned forward. So what changed? The official reports just mentioned the discovery of a unique ecosystem. Finch barked a laugh that turned several heads. A unique ecosystem. That's cute. What they don't tell you in history class is that unique ecosystem was code for we woke something up that had been asleep for millions of years. The shadow beneath the ice. Hours before the discovery that changed everything, Professor Alastair Finch stood on the specialized drilling rig, Deep Drill 7, on the frozen surface of Lake Vostok. His thermal suit was dusted with frost, and he hadn't slept in 30 hours. Sir, the drill has hit something, Dr. Anya Sharma, the team's paleobiologist, reported, her voice steady despite the clear excitement. Sonics indicate a hollow chamber and a strange energy signature. Put them through to the main screen, Finch ordered, trying to keep his voice calm. He knew full well that if their drill had penetrated the bottom of Lake Vostok, the main screen flickered to life, displaying a fuzzy sonar image of a massive, anomalous structure. It looked nothing like a natural formation. Professor Finch, a technician's voice chimed in. We're getting unusual signals. They're not normal geological echoes. How unusual? Finch asked, choosing his words carefully. They sound like sounds, the technician replied, his voice hesitant. As if something is singing. The crew around them exchanged confused glances. There were no records of anything like this in such a pristine environment. The signal seems to be strengthening, Dr. Sharma said, her eyes fixed on the screen. It has a rhythm. Don't get ahead of yourselves, Doctor, Finch replied with more confidence than he felt. Just continue with the drilling protocol. We're almost there. From her station, Dr. Sharma shot Finch a questioning look. He ignored it. It appears we've made contact with an object, another technician announced. Definitely not rock. And it's glowing. Finch turned to Sharma, who looked utterly baffled. Sir, what exactly are you feeling? Professor I don't know anymore. It's not a type of organism I've ever encountered. It's alive, and it's communicating. Sharma whispered. What object? Finch collapsed into his command chair, exhaustion catching up with him. We're about to find out, Lieutenant. I'm praying that what we found won't destroy us. The secret of origin. Wait, I interrupted Finch's story. You're saying you found something alive communicating under the ice? Was it an alien life form? The old professor's eyes twinkled. That's what makes this story so good, kid. It wasn't entirely alien. It was older. I frowned. I don't understand. 25 years before the discovery, when global governments began collaborating on research into Earth's most extreme regions, Dr. Lena Petrova, head of Russia's deep underground quantum physics program, approached the UN Security Council with a wild theory. She believed we'd found something in Antarctica that could change our understanding of the universe. Something like what? Finch took another sip of his drink. That's where it gets interesting. See, back in the 2040s, a joint research expedition discovered unusual energy readings 2 miles beneath the Antarctic ice. Whatever they found was classified above top secret. All we knew were rumors, that it wasn't human in origin and that it predated our civilization by thousands, perhaps millions of years. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the bar's air conditioning. You're saying we found technology, or something non-human, before we even met actual aliens? That's exactly what I'm saying, Finch nodded. Lewis theorized that what we found might have belonged to a species they'd encountered before, possibly one they feared. But her ideas were dismissed as wishful thinking by most of military command, until the signals from Lake Vostok began to amplify. That was 24 hours before the discovery changed everything. What did you do? General Petrova's face on the secure channel was a mask of disbelief. Finch kept his voice low, having withdrawn to his private quarters for this conversation. We drilled through it. There was no other option. We needed to know what it was. To Finch's surprise, Petrova didn't seem angry. Instead, a slow smile spread across her face. You drilled through it, and it didn't destroy you. Interesting. It was all I could think of, Finch admitted. These signals, they're getting stronger. We don't know what they are. And you sent your team to the Lake Vostok coordinates. Yes, it was where my research team had been drilling. Petrova's smile expanded. Finch, you magnificent bastard. You have no idea what you've done. I'm assuming that means I haven't just doomed humanity by my recklessness. Quite the opposite, Petrova assured him. I'm sending you a file now. Priority Alpha clearance. This is for your eyes only. Finch's tablet beeped as it received the encrypted document. What am I looking at? The truth about Lake Vostok. It wasn't chosen randomly when it was included in Russia's research program in the 2030s. It was positioned directly above what we've been calling Anomaly 0. Finch quickly scanned the document, his eyes widening. This can't be real. Oh, it's real, Petrova assured him. The energy signature we detected is unlike anything produced by known physics. And the structure containing it, well, the dating puts it at roughly 300 million years old. Before the dinosaurs. Long before, Petrova nodded. Whatever built, it wasn't from Earth. And based on the symbols we've partially decoded, we believe it was a device, or at least a containment unit, designed to be found by species achieving interstellar travel. Finch looked up from the document. Does it actually work? Petrova's expression sobered. We don't know. We've never dared activate it. The power requirements alone would drain half the planet's energy grid. But here's where your discovery gets interesting. The signals from it, they indicate it's awake. The cosmic symphony. So, there really was something buried under Antarctica? I asked, completely engrossed in the story. Finch nodded slowly. Something old, something powerful, something that wasn't built by human hands. But what exactly was it? Even now, that remains partially classified. What I can tell you is that it was a structure about the size of a football stadium buried 2 miles down. Carbon dating puts it at roughly 300 million years old. I'm struggling to find words. Impossible. Yeah, that was our reaction too. But there it was. Evidence that Earth had been visited long before humans evolved. The working theory is that whatever built it used Earth as a place to hide something, possibly from a species that had been buried in the galaxy's history. And Dr. Petrova thought it was a weapon or a prison. The translations were never definitive, but what mattered was what it truly was. Finch's eyes took on a distant look, and as it turns out, it was a symphony, a cosmic symphony we've only just begun to understand. Hours after the discovery, Finch watched tensely as his research team continued to investigate the found structure. True to their word, the sonic signals became more complex, no longer simple singing, but a combination of sounds, melodies that seem to carry meaning. They're following the approved data stream, Dr. Sharma reported, tracking the strange signals emanating from the structure. Any attempts to decipher it? Finch asked. Negative, sir. All our systems are maintaining passive observation only as agreed. We can't do anything else. Finch nodded, his mouth dry. The discovery had bought them 24 hours to think. But what would happen when they realized what they found wasn't just a weapon or simple technology? His secure terminal beeped with an incoming transmission. Dr. Petrova again, this time looking like she hadn't slept in days. They're on their way, Finch informed her. I know. I'm tracking them from our remaining satellite network. Petrova's expression was unreadable. Finch, I need to know you're prepared for what might happen next. Which is what exactly? Best case scenario, we understand its true nature and use it to help humanity. Worst case, we've awakened something that will destroy us. Finch felt a headache building behind his eyes. Those are some pretty extreme scenarios, Doctor. There's a third possibility, Petrova continued. It might begin to communicate in ways we can't comprehend. She hesitated. If that happens, we have no idea what kind of chain reaction it might trigger. Whatever's down there, it's still generating energy after 300 million years. Destabilizing it could have unpredictable consequences. Finch pinched the bridge of his nose. Wonderful. So, we might accidentally trigger the very thing we're researching. The universe isn't without a sense of irony, Petrova replied dryly. But I've taken precautions. I've dispatched a team to the site. If it attempts anything hostile, we'll try to contain any reaction. With all due respect, Doctor, how the hell do you contain something we barely understand? Petrova's expression stiffened. We've had decades to study it, Professor. We may not know what it is, but we've developed protocols for what to do if it becomes unstable. Before Finch could respond, Sharma called out from her station. Sir, the signals from the structure, it's intensifying. It's as if it's responding to us. Finch turned back to Petrova. This is it. Moment of truth. Keep me informed, Petrova said, and the communication cut off. For several tense minutes, the crew on the rig watched as the structure beneath the ice began to emit faint glows, illuminating through their sensors. The sonic signals were now clearer, no longer simple singing, but a complex symphony of sound and light. Sir, Sharma said suddenly, the structure, it's changing. It's not targeting anything. It looks like an opening. Before Finch could process this information, the communications officer announced. Incoming transmission from the structure itself, sir. On screen, Finch ordered. Dr. Petrova's face appeared, but something was different about her demeanor. The aggressive confidence was gone, replaced by what Finch could only interpret as agitation. Professor Finch, Petrova's translated voice came through. We have partially deciphered the signals from the structure. It is not a weapon. It is a generative artifact. Finch had no idea what a generative artifact was, but he wasn't about to reveal his ignorance. As I informed you, Dr. Earth's final discovery. Petrova's eyes flickered rapidly. This is not a thing. It is a process of creation, the eternal legacy. So, there was something under Antarctica that could create life? I asked, incredulous. Finch nodded. Exactly. Their reaction told us everything we needed to know. They recognized the energy signature immediately. In their history, going back thousands of years before they achieved spaceflight, there were legends of an ancient species that had once seeded life on various planets. A species that had mysteriously disappeared, leaving behind only artifacts of tremendous power. And they thought this thing under Antarctica was built by these predecessors. They didn't just think it, they knew it. The energy signature was apparently unmistakable. Finch finished his drink and put the glass down with deliberate care. What we learned next changed everything we thought we knew about humanity's place in the cosmos. Hours after the discovery, the secure conference room aboard the research rig had been cleared of all personnel except Finch and the holographic projections of Earth's 5 most senior military leaders, including Dr. Petrova. On the opposite side of the table, the projection of Colonel Nikolai Voronov of the Eurasian Defense Coalition loomed, flanked by two top Russian scientists. Let me ensure I understand correctly, Colonel Voronov of the Eurasian Defense Coalition said, his thick accent coming through clearly. You're saying that this artifact is not a weapon, but something else entirely. It is a seed, one of the Russian scientists replied through the translator. A world seed? What? Finch couldn't help interjecting. The Russian scientist's mouth clicked rapidly as it spoke. The predecessors did not build weapons as your species conceived them. They built potentialities, seeds that when activated could transform entire worlds or destroy them, depending on the intent of the activator. That doesn't make any sense, Petrova argued. How can a device know intent? The predecessors did not rely on devices, the second Russian scientist explained. What you have discovered is partially technological, yes, but also biological, perhaps even conscious in ways your science cannot yet comprehend. An uncomfortable silence fell over the room. Are you saying? Finch finally spoke. That we have some sort of dormant alien life form buried under Antarctica. Not exactly life, as you understand it, the first scientist clarified. The predecessors exist partially in dimensions beyond the four you perceive. What remains in your Antarctic region is an anchor, a connection point between your reality and something else. Colonel Voronov swore softly in Russian. If activated, the second scientist continued, the seed will draw power from these other dimensions. The results will be unpredictable. In our history, worlds where such seeds were activated sometimes became paradises. Others were reduced to cosmic dust. A cosmic lottery, Finch asserted. Wonderful. Not entirely random, the second scientist corrected. The outcome depends on complex factors, including the dominant consciousness patterns of the activating species. A species mainly motivated by conquest, for example. The Russian scientist's mandibles twitched in what might have been the Russian equivalent of nervous hesitation. Would trigger a destructive response. Petrova finished the thought. Is that what you're saying? It is possible, the scientist admitted. Finch studied Colonel Voronov carefully. And that's why your people are suddenly interested in diplomatic solutions. You're afraid that if you conquer Earth, this seed might activate and destroy both our worlds. Our concerns are more complex than that, Professor, Voronov replied. The activation of a predecessor seed will draw attention from others. Others? Dr. Petrova leaned forward. What others? Colonel Voronov's compound eyes flickered between the scientists, who seemed suddenly reluctant to speak. There are species in this galaxy far older than either of ours, Voronov finally said. Species that monitor predecessor sites. The activation of such a seed will be noticed. You're saying there are other alien civilizations out there watching these seed things? Finch couldn't keep the disbelief from his voice. Not civilizations as you would understand them, the colonel replied. Entities that have existed since before your sun burned hydrogen. They do not interfere with younger species unless predecessor technology is disrupted. Dr. Petrova's hologram modified at Finch with a look that clearly said, we're way out of our depth here. So, Finch summarized, try and make sense of these revelations. You're withdrawing not because you're afraid of the seed itself, but because you're afraid of drawing the attention of these ancient entities. Both concerns are valid, Voronov admitted. But yes, the latter is more immediate. My species has encountered evidence of their displeasure once before. We do not wish to repeat that experience. What happened? Finch couldn't help asking. Colonel Voronov's posture stiffened. An entire star system in what you call the Crab Nebula. Once home to billions of my kind, now an expanding cloud of radiation and elementary particles. The implications are heavy in the air. Then it seemed Colonel Voronov broke the silence. We have mutual incentive to resolve this conflict peacefully. So that's it? I asked, incredulous. They just left because they were scared of some cosmic boogeyman. Finch gasped. It sounds ridiculous when you put it that way. But remember, what they had witnessed was complete annihilation. They weren't exactly given to baseless superstition. And the official story became diplomatic intervention. What would you have called it? Aliens withdrew because they're afraid of the eldritch horror we've got buried under the ice? Not exactly the kind of thing that inspires public confidence. Finch shrugged. Besides, what followed was genuine diplomacy. But what about the artifact itself? The seeds? What happened to it? Finch's expression grew more serious. That's where the story gets complicated. After they left, there was considerable debate about what to do with it. Some wanted to study it more aggressively. Others wanted to bury it deeper and pretend we'd never found it. And which side won? Neither. 3 days after the signal subsided, something happened at Ellsworth Station. Something that's still largely classified. 3 days after the event ended, Finch's shuttle touched down at the perimeter of what had once been Ellsworth Research Station. The landscape around him was transformed, not destroyed, as one might expect after some catastrophic event, but altered in ways that defied easy explanation. The snow and ice remained, but it was somehow different. Crystalline structures that caught the sunlight and refracted it in Antarctic impossible rainbows. The air itself seemed charged, as though the boundary between atmosphere and vacuum had become more suggestive than physical law. Dr. Petrova met him at the landing zone, her expression grim. What happened here? Finch asked as they walked toward the main facility, or what remained of it. The buildings were intact, but they seemed to shift when viewed from different angles, as though existing in multiple configurations simultaneously. We're still trying to figure that out, Petrova admitted. After the signal subsided, we increased our monitoring of the artifact. Energy readings started fluctuating in patterns we hadn't seen before. It was dormant for 300 million years, and it just happened to wake up after being scanned? Finch couldn't keep the skepticism from his voice. That's the working theory. Their scans might have triggered some kind of response mechanism. Petrova led him through a security checkpoint where each guard wore not just standard protective gear, but also strange metallic headbands. These helped filter the perceptual distortions, she explained, handing one to Finch. He put on reluctantly. Immediately, the visual shifting of the building stabilized, though the rainbow refractions in the ice intensified. 2 days ago, at 3:47 hours, there was a massive energy surge from the artifact. Petrova continued as they entered the main building. Not an explosion, not radiation, something else entirely. When our teams regained access, they found this. She gestured around them. The interior of the facility should have been a standard research station. Utilitarian furnishings, monitoring equipment, perhaps a few creature comforts for the staff. Instead, Finch found himself in what appeared to be a vast chamber that couldn't possibly fit within the building's exterior dimensions. The walls were covered in shifting symbols that resembled the ones he'd seen in Petrova's classified files, but animated now, flowing and changing like liquid mathematics. The floor beneath them was solid, but seemed to pulse with faint luminescence that responded to their footsteps. What the hell is this? Finch whined. We're calling it a translation interface, Petrova replied, her voice equally hushed. It appeared after the energy surge. The artifact didn't destroy the station. It converted it. Converted it into what? A means of communication. Petrova led him toward the center of the impossible room, where a column of light rose from floor to ceiling. Within it, shapes formed and dissolved. Some recognizable as geometric forms, others entirely alien. Communication with what? Not what who. Petrova's expression was a mixture of awe and trepidation. The predecessors didn't vanish, Professor. They evolved, transcended physical form, and now they're reaching out to us. Finch stared at the column of light, trying to process this information. Why now? Why us? That's the question, isn't it? Petrova sighed. The working theory is that our willingness to understand it, rather than use it as a weapon, even when faced with extinction, triggered some kind of evaluation protocol. We passed a test we didn't know we were taking. A test, Finch repeated flatly. So what happens now? The light column pulsed, and suddenly the shifting forms within it coalesced into a roughly humanoid shape, though one with proportions that seemed to constantly adjust, as though physical consistency was an afterthought. Now, a voice speaks directly into Finch's mind, bypassing his ears entirely. We talk. I stared at Finch in disbelief. You're saying you personally spoke with one of these predecessors? The old professor's weathered face creased in a smile. That's what the official record states. And what did it say? What did you talk about? That, Finch said, finishing the last of his drink, remains classified at the highest level. What I can tell you is that humanity's understanding of our place in the universe changed fundamentally that day. The Lake Light event wasn't the end of something. It was the beginning. The beginning of what? Finch's eyes took on that distant look again. Of humanity's true purpose, the reason we evolved on this particular rock orbiting this particular star. Which is, I urged when he didn't continue. Consider this, kid. What if intelligent life isn't the random outcome of evolution that we've always assumed? What if consciousness itself, at least the particular type of consciousness that humans possess, was the whole point? I frowned, trying to follow his logic. I don't understand. The predecessors didn't just leave that artifact under Antarctica by chance. They placed it there on a world that at the time was dominated by nothing more sophisticated than primitive bacteria. Why would they do that? Because they were playing the long game, a game measured in hundreds of millions of years. Finch leaned forward. They seeded thousands of worlds across the galaxy, each with the potential to produce intelligent life. Earth was just one of many experiments. Experiments in what? In creating consciousness that could eventually join them. Finch tapped the side of his head. The human mind, specifically our capacity for abstract thought, for imagining possibilities beyond immediate physical reality, isn't just a quirk of evolution. It's a deliberately cultivated trait. I sat back, stunned by the implications. You're saying human evolution was guided, not directly controlled, but nudged in certain directions over millions of years. Finch snapped. At least that's the theory that emerged for what we learned at Ellsworth. And Draxus, where do they fit into this? Different experiment, different parameters. Their consciousness evolved along different lines, more collective, less individually imaginative. Both valid approaches to the same ultimate goal, which is creating species capable of eventually transcending physical form entirely, joining the predecessors in whatever state of existence they've evolved into. I let that sink in for a moment. And we're what? Candidates for advancement or something? Finch gasped. Put that way, it sounds like religious nonsense, but in scientific terms, we're talking about a form of existence beyond the four-dimensional space-time we currently inhabit. The predecessors exist in, or at least can perceive and interact with dimensions beyond our normal experience. The resonance gateway. So, what happened after your conversation with this entity? Did it just leave? Not exactly. The interface at Ellsworth remains active today, although access is restricted to a select few researchers with a psychological profile to handle direct communication with non-human consciousness. And the Draxus, did they ever threaten Earth again? Finch shook his head. Quite the opposite. Once they understood that we were, in a sense, cousins in the predecessor relationship's grand experiment, our relationship changed dramatically. The Mutual Development Treaty of 2046 established a framework for what eventually became the Galactic Concord. All because of what was buried under Antarctica, I mused. All because we chose not to use it as a weapon, Finch corrected. That's the detail that gets lost in the classified reports and redacted histories. It wasn't the artifact itself that changed everything. It was humanity's approach to it. He leaned back in his seat, suddenly looking every one of his 80-plus years. You know the irony of the whole thing? If the Draxus had never invaded, we might never have discovered the artifact's true purpose. It might have remained just another scientific curiosity, buried in the ice for another million years. So, the invasion was actually fortunate. I wouldn't go that far. Thousands died in those first 48 hours. But in the cosmic scheme of things, it seems things unfold in strange ways sometimes. As I packed up my recording equipment, Finch placed a weathered hand on my arm. There's one more thing, he said quietly. Something not in any official record. I paused, interested. What's that? The conversation I had with the predecessor entity. There was a moment when it showed me something. A glimpse of possibilities. futures branching out like a vast tree. Each limb represents a potential path for humanity. What did you see? Finch's eyes took on that distant look again. In some branches, we destroyed ourselves through war or environmental collapse. In others, we stagnated, never reaching beyond our solar system. But in a few, just a few, we joined the predecessors, becoming something more. And which branches are we on now? The old administrator smiled enigmatically. That's the thing about free will, kid. We're making that choice every day with every decision. The artifact didn't change our nature. It just shows us what we could become. He stood slowly, joints creaking with age. The war with the Draxus ended the moment they learned what we had buried beneath Antarctica. But humanity's real journey, that's just beginning. As he walked away, I couldn't help but glance upward through the bar skylight to the stars now visible in the evening sky. Somewhere out there, other experiments were unfolding on millions of worlds. Other consciousnesses were evolving, perhaps approaching their own moments of truth. And somewhere beyond normal perception, the predecessors were watching, waiting for the children of their grand experiment to join them in the cosmos. A new dawn. 20 years later, I stand at the edge of what was once Ellsworth Station, now the center of the Antarctic Communion Complex. The crystalline structures have grown over the decades, forming spires that reach impossibly high into the clear polar sky. My credentials as Earth's official historian grant me access that few others receive. Finch has been gone for 15 years now, but his legacy lives on in the diplomatic corps that now represents humanity throughout the galactic community. The guard hands me one of the newer perception filters, sleeker than the crude headbands of 20 years ago, but serving the same purpose. As I fit it over my temples, the familiar disorientation hits me, then passes as the filter calibrates to my brain waves. The interface is expecting you, the guard informs me, gesturing toward the central dome. I nod my thanks and proceed along the pathway. Around me, human and Draxian researchers work side by side, studying the ever-expanding crystalline growths that have transformed this part of Antarctica into something alien yet beautiful. Inside the dome, the column of light still rises from floor to ceiling, though it has grown more complex over the years, branching like a tree of pure energy, each limb extending toward different parts of the chamber. I take my position on the central platform, feeling the familiar tingling as the interface scans my neural patterns. Historian, the voice speaks directly into my mind as it has during each of my previous visits. You have questions? Always. I reply both aloud and in thought. About the future, the voice observes. Not a question? Yes. The Draxian High Council is suggesting the next phase of integration. There are concerns among some human factions. The light column pulses, shapes forming and dissolving within it. Fear of loss of identity. A natural concern for individuated consciousness. Is it justified? All fears are justified from the perspective of those who hold them. The voice has grown more adept at human communication patterns over the years, though it still occasionally speaks in ways that require interpretation. But transformation is not erasure. Integration is not absorption. Some believe we're moving too quickly. By what metric? The universe is 14 billion years old. Your species has been self-aware for a mere moment in cosmic time. I smiled despite myself. That's not especially reassuring to people worried about the next election cycle. A ripple passes through the light column, what I've come to recognize as the entity's version of amusement. Perspective is difficult for time-bound consciousness. That's why I'm here. The Council wants reassurance that the integration proposal aligns with the optimal path. The entity is silent for a moment. Although with a being that experiences time differently than humans, such pauses are difficult to interpret. We do not dictate paths. It finally responds. We observe. We offer perspective. The choice must be yours. But you've seen the possibilities. I press, referring to the branching futures Finch described. Many have collapsed. Others have emerged. Your species excels at creating new potentialities. Is that a good thing? Another ripple through the light. It is the thing that makes you human. I consider this. The integration proposal. Does it lead toward or away from transcendence? The light column expands suddenly, filling the chamber with prismatic refractions. For a moment, I experienced what Finch must have seen 2 decades ago. Branching futures, countless possibilities, some brilliant with potential, others dark with warning. Transcendence is not a destination. The entity responds as the vision fades. It is a process. The proposal is neither correct nor incorrect. It is simply one possible step. That's frustratingly vague, I observe. Specificity is a constraint of four-dimensional thinking, the entity counters. But I can offer this. The proposed integration with Draxian consciousness would expand human perception in ways beneficial to your further development. At what cost? Change always carries costs. Nothing is gained without something being released. I sighed. Will we lose what makes us human? The light pulses again. This time forms a shape that resembles a DNA double helix, but with additional strands weaving through it in patterns that seem to defy normal geometry. What makes you human is not static. It has evolved continuously since your species first emerged. What you fear losing is merely your current state, a state that is already transitional. Transitional to what? To what you will become. The helix transforms, the strands separating and recombining in new configurations. The Draxis follows a different evolutionary path, but toward a complementary form of consciousness. Integration does not mean erasure of either pattern, but the creation of new possibilities that neither could achieve alone. I watched the dancing strands of light, trying to grasp concepts that push at the boundaries of human understanding. Is this why the predecessors created the artifacts? To eventually bring different consciousness types together? Creation implies a beginning. The entity responds. The artifacts are interventions in an ongoing process, catalysts rather than origins. But to what end? End implies cessation. The entity counters. Perhaps consider what continuation. I resist the urge to sigh again. 20 years of diplomatic relations with post-physical entities has taught humanity patience with communication differences. But sometimes the philosophical gaps remain challenging. Let me rephrase. What does this process ultimately make possible that wouldn't be possible otherwise? The light column contracts, then expands in a pulse that momentarily fills the entire chamber. In that expansion, I briefly perceive something vast, a network of consciousness spanning not just our galaxy, but beyond. A complex interweaving of thought and existence that makes our current conception of reality seem as limited as a two-dimensional drawing trying to represent a sculpture. Participation. The entity says simply as the vision fades. I stand in silence for a long moment, processing what I've been shown, or at least what my limited perception could grasp of it. I'll tell the Council the integration proposal has merit, I finally say, but that we should proceed with full transparency and voluntary participation. A wise approach for consciousness that values individual choice, the entity agrees. The path of forced evolution leads to unstable outcomes. I think of the Crab Nebula, where the Draxis once attempted to weaponize a predecessor artifact. Some histories are best not repeated. Before I go, I say, there's something I've always wondered. Why Earth? Out of all the potential worlds, why place an artifact here? The light column ripples in what I've come to recognize as something like contemplative amusement. Earth was not special, the entity responded. And yet, all worlds where consciousness emerges are special in their particular way. Your planet had favorable conditions for developing human consciousness, specifically for developing consciousness that asks why. The light pulses. A simple question with complex implications. It is the beginning of all science, all philosophy, all art. And the Draxis, what question defines their evolution? How? The entity replies. Their consciousness excels at process, at methodology, at implementation. Together, Together we might actually accomplish something worthwhile. I finished the thought. Another ripple of apparent amusement. You already have. The question is what you might accomplish next. As I left the chamber, I glanced back at the column of light. This impossible interface between human understanding and something far beyond it. Finch was right all those years ago. The war ended the moment the Draxis learned what we had buried beneath Antarctica. But the real story, the real journey was just beginning. Outside, the Antarctic sun casts rainbow refractions through the crystalline structures that continue to grow across the landscape. A Draxian researcher nods a greeting as I pass. Its compound eyes glittering behind a modified perception filter adapted for its species' unique neurology. Productive communication, it asks in the precise, slightly flat manner of translated Draxian speech. Enlightening, if not entirely clear, I reply with a smile. The Draxian's mandibles click in what I've learned to recognize as appreciative amusement. Clarity is overrated. Possibility is where growth occurs. As I look up at the crystalline spires reaching toward the sky, I can't help but think that the true legacy of what was buried beneath Antarctica isn't the artifact itself, but what it reveals about humanity's potential and the universe's endless capacity for wonder. The war had ended, but the greater adventure was still unfolding, one possibility at a time. End.